I always thought family was supposed to be a safety net, a place where you could trust people implicitly, where loyalty and love were constants, no matter what. I was wrong, dead wrong. It started with Aunt Linda. She had always been a little dramatic, the kind of person who could turn a stubbed toe into a near death experience if she wanted. But lately, her stories had taken a darker turn. She was sick, really sick. Not a cold, not the flu, something rare, life-threatening, something that demanded attention. The first post I saw was a photo of her in a hospital bed, an IV in her arm, her face pale under fluorescent lights. She captioned it, "Some days are harder than others. Grateful for my family who keeps me going." I remember staring at that, my stomach twisting. My parents shared it immediately, and the comments poured in well wishes, prayers, even offers to help with bills. At first, I wanted to believe her. I went to visit, brought flowers, tried to sit quietly with her as she told me about the fatigue, the pain, the endless tests. I watched her carefully, memorized the subtle pauses, the way she avoided eye contact when I asked specifics. Something didn't sit right. It wasn't just the timing, although that alone was suspicious. Hospital visits always seemed to happen when she didn't want to attend a family barbecue, or when a cousin's birthday meant she would have to show up in person. And the photos, the captions, they felt too polished, too rehearsed, like she had spent hours crafting the perfect sick but brave image. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. She's your aunt. Maybe she really is sick. Don't be cruel, I whispered to myself at night. But a nagging feeling grew. A quiet, persistent voice in the back of my mind telling me something was off. Then came the hashtags. Every post was a carefully curated collection. Hashtag fighting through it. Hashtag strong for family. Hashtag grateful. I started noticing patterns. The same hospital room angles, the same IV bag in every photo, even the same blanket that seemed to appear on different days. My curiosity shifted to suspicion, but I still wasn't ready to act. I wasn't sure what I would find, or if I even wanted to. That night, lying awake in bed, I couldn't stop replaying the visits in my mind. The way she had described a new round of tests, but couldn't remember the doctor's name. The way she claimed she had spent hours in the infusion room, yet she somehow had pictures showing her in her living room wearing hospital gowns and wristbands. I felt a cold knot of doubt tighten in my stomach. I told myself to be patient, to observe, to wait. But deep down, I knew that if there was any truth to my suspicions, this was just the beginning. Something about Aunt Linda's illness didn't add up, and I had a feeling that following that trail would change everything I thought I knew about my family. I didn't realize it at the time, but that was the night my quiet curiosity turned into a mission. A mission that would uncover more than just lies about health. It would uncover betrayal, manipulation, and the fragility of trust in the people you thought you knew best. But I didn't realize that was just the beginning of the nightmare. The next morning, I started paying closer attention. I didn't confront Aunt Linda, not yet. I wanted facts, not assumptions, and I needed a clear picture before anyone else got hurt or misled further. I began keeping a private log. Every post she made, every supposed hospital visit, every update about her treatment. I noted dates, times, even the captions and hashtags. I cross-referenced them with my own memory of family events, social gatherings, and public records I could access online. It wasn't long before the inconsistencies became impossible to ignore. She claimed a doctor's appointment on a Wednesday morning, yet she had posted pictures of herself smiling with cousins at a brunch that same day. She mentioned a new medication in one post, but the photo she shared showed bottles that had clearly been purchased months earlier. Every story had a crack. Every claim had a shadow of doubt. I wasn't sure if it was intentional yet. Maybe she really is sick, and the overlap was coincidence. But the more I watched, the more the coincidences multiplied, until they felt deliberate. I started talking quietly to my siblings, careful not to sound accusatory. "Have you noticed?" I asked one night after dinner. My sister, who had always been a little skeptical of Aunt Linda, nodded slowly. "Yeah," she said. "Sometimes it feels like she's putting on a show." But I didn't want to believe it. Even my parents were starting to show cracks in their blind trust. They worried constantly about her, but the concern sometimes bordered on blind panic. Rushing to the store for groceries she hadn't asked for, calling doctors who didn't exist, leaving messages to confirm appointments that never happened. Watching it made my stomach twist. I started noticing patterns beyond the posts. Aunt Linda's hospital visits almost always coincided with events she wanted to avoid. A cousin's engagement party? Suddenly, she was too exhausted to attend. A neighbor's gathering? She had a new round of tests. It was always convenient. Too convenient. That was the moment the seed of an idea planted itself in my mind. Maybe this wasn't just a sick person seeking sympathy. Maybe this was manipulation. I didn't say anything to anyone yet. I wanted certainty. So I took the next step quietly. Online research. I looked up the clinics and doctors she mentioned, checked insurance databases, even did reverse image searches on some of her photos. And then I found the first clear red flag. A photo of her hospital bed was actually from a stock website. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling a strange mix of shock and vindication. I wasn't imagining it. She had been faking this. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding, and whispered to myself, "So it's true. She's lying. And she's been lying for a long time." But even as that realization sunk in, I knew this was just the tip of the iceberg. There were questions I couldn't yet answer. How long had she been doing this? Was it just for attention, or had she taken money from the family? And most importantly, how far would I have to go to stop her? I didn't know then that uncovering the truth would require everything I had: patience, precision, and a willingness to watch the family I loved be hurt before I could protect them. And I certainly didn't know that Aunt Linda's next move would bring her even closer to being exposed than she ever imagined. I knew I had to be careful. One wrong step, one slip of suspicion, and Aunt Linda could turn the situation around, manipulate the family even further, and bury the truth. So I started digging quietly, systematically, like a detective piecing together a case. I took notes obsessively. Every appointment she claimed, every new symptom, every medication she mentioned. I made spreadsheets. I tracked her social media posts, the times she uploaded photos, and even the locations in the background. Some were clearly staged in her living room, some were cleverly rotated stock images. I felt a mix of horror and fascination at the lengths she had gone to. Then came the insurance and clinic checks. I called offices she had named, pretending to be a family member asking for information, and I was met with confusion, sometimes blank stares. "No one by that name has an appointment with Dr. Reynolds," one receptionist told me, politely but firmly. Another clinic said, "We don't have any records of Miss Linda Thompson at our facility." It was sinking in. Every story, every dramatic hospital post, every tearful video, it was all fabricated. She had been weaving a web of lies for months, maybe years, and no one had noticed until now. My mind raced. I felt anger, yes, but also a strange, calm determination. I didn't want to confront her in the moment. That would be messy, emotional, and she could manipulate it in her favor. Real revenge, or justice, required precision. I decided to start collecting physical evidence. I photographed her staged medications, bottles that were clearly expired or unopened. I saved screenshots of her posts, noting the times, captions, and hashtags. I even tracked emails she had sent to other family members, begging for help, offering dramatic updates on her condition. Every lie was cataloged, every deception was tangible. There was one night in particular that made my stomach churn. I was scrolling through her posts when I noticed a pattern I hadn't before. A hospital photo posted exactly at 8 a.m. every Wednesday, but I had witnessed her walking her dog outside at that very hour in my neighborhood. I froze, staring at the screen. My hands shook a little. She had been so meticulous, so careful, yet she had made a mistake, a crack in the armor. I knew then that the time to wait was over. I wasn't going to confront her impulsively, but I could plan. I could prepare a way to show the entire family the truth, with undeniable proof. And even as I felt that spark of strategy, I realized something unsettling. Aunt Linda had been lying to more than just my family. If I dug deeper, I might uncover a whole network of manipulation: friends, neighbors, even her workplace. And the question that chilled me the most was how far would she go to keep her lies alive once they were exposed? I leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath. I had the first pieces of the puzzle, but I still needed the full picture. And in the quiet of that night, I promised myself one thing. I would see this through, not just for me, but for everyone she had deceived. Little did I know, the next discovery would make my stomach drop even further, and it would mark the point where this wasn't just about suspicion anymore. This was about uncovering the truth, no matter how explosive it might be. The more I dug, the more I realized just how elaborate Aunt Linda's performance had been. It wasn't just a few exaggerated posts or harmless exaggerations. It was a full-blown, meticulously constructed illusion. I started creating a folder on my laptop, labeled clearly Linda's Lies. Inside were screenshots of posts, photos of staged medications, notes about fake appointments, even copies of emails she had sent to other family members begging for help, offering dramatic updates on her condition. Every piece of evidence I found only made the picture clearer. She had been manipulating everyone for months, if not years. One afternoon, I decided to do something subtle, a little test. I casually asked Aunt Linda about her latest doctor's appointment during a family lunch. She launched into her usual dramatic monologue, describing tests, symptoms, and treatments. I asked a simple follow-up question: the name of the attending nurse. She froze. Her smile faltered. She glanced around the table, eyes darting, as if hoping someone else would rescue her. No one did. My heart pounded as I saw her falter, just a small crack, but enough to confirm my suspicions. She was lying, and she knew I was onto her. From that moment on, I became even more methodical. I cross-referenced every date she had claimed to be in the hospital with public events, social media check-ins from friends, and even weather reports. On one occasion, she said she had spent the day in the infusion room, yet the local weather radar clearly showed a snowstorm that morning, and I had a friend post a photo of her walking outside in the sun at that exact time. I remember the first time I actually said it out loud to myself. She's been lying to everyone. Everyone. My chest tightened. It was overwhelming. The betrayal, the audacity, and the fact that no one had suspected a thing. And then came the most shocking discovery yet. I was reviewing her hospital photos with reverse image search when I stumbled upon the source of one image, a stock website. It wasn't just a generic hospital scene. It was her hospital bed photo, the one she had posted with the caption about being weak but strong for family. It had been lifted directly from a free stock photo collection. I sat back, stunned. Part of me wanted to scream, to confront her immediately, but I knew I couldn't. The power in this situation wasn't in anger, it was in the proof. I needed the full story, every shred of evidence, before anyone could argue or spin it around. I started piecing everything together, creating a sort of case file. I imagined presenting it to the family like a story unfolding, each lie exposed with proof, each manipulation revealed clearly. The idea made my pulse quicken. I wasn't doing this to humiliate her, though part of me admitted that the thought was satisfying. I was doing this to protect the family from further manipulation, to restore trust, and to show everyone the truth. Even as I worked, I felt a strange mixture of excitement and dread. The closer I got to the truth, the more I realized how explosive it would be. Aunt Linda wasn't just lying about a cold or a minor illness. She had constructed a full-blown false narrative that had emotionally and financially ensnared everyone around her. Once I had enough evidence to be certain, I started thinking about how to proceed. I couldn't just confront Aunt Linda privately. She was clever enough to twist any accusation into a guilt trip, a performance, or an emotional meltdown that would have everyone siding with her. No, this had to be planned, precise, public but controlled. Before I moved forward, though, I needed to test her. I had to see how she would react if someone asked subtle questions, if her stories were even slightly challenged. I didn't want her to know I was onto her fully, not yet. One weekend during a family brunch, I casually brought up her upcoming treatment. "So, Aunt Linda," I asked, keeping my tone light, "how are you feeling about that new medication your doctor mentioned?" Her face froze. I could see her brain working behind her eyes, recalculating, scrambling for a response. She coughed lightly and said, "Oh, it's fine, managing." I nodded, smiling, letting the moment linger. She didn't have the answer for the follow-up questions, the specific names, the schedule, the dosage. My siblings glanced at her curiously, sensing something was off. Aunt Linda quickly changed the topic, redirecting attention to a story about a neighbor's dog. That small task confirmed what I already suspected. She was lying, and her web of deception was cracking. But I also realized something important. Confrontation would be dangerous if I wasn't fully prepared. She was manipulative, skilled at turning emotions into armor, and she had spent years perfecting her performance. I began refining my plan. I would need every post she had made about her illness, screenshots of all social media interactions, copies of her emails and text messages asking for help or money, physical evidence, staged medications, props, and anything she claimed were part of her treatments. I started organizing everything in chronological order, creating a sort of case file. I imagined presenting it to the family like a story unfolding, each lie exposed with proof, each manipulation revealed clearly. The idea made my pulse quicken. I wasn't doing this to humiliate her, though part of me admitted that the thought was satisfying. I was doing this to protect the family from further manipulation, to restore trust, and to show everyone the truth. Even as I worked, I felt a strange mixture of excitement and dread. The closer I got to the truth, the more I realized how explosive it would be. Aunt Linda wasn't just lying about a cold or a minor illness. She had constructed a full-blown false narrative that had emotionally and financially ensnared everyone around her. And yet, even with all that in mind, I couldn't help but feel a thrill at the thought of her losing control, of finally seeing her carefully constructed world collapse under the weight of truth. Little did I know, my next steps, setting up the family meeting and planning the reveal, would test not only her reaction, but the bonds of our family in ways I never expected. Once I was certain of her lies and had all the evidence organized, I began thinking seriously about the confrontation. It had to be orchestrated perfectly, a controlled setting, the entire family present, and the proof undeniable. There could be no room for her manipulations or dramatic excuses. I spent nights creating a timeline, arranging screenshots, photos, and documents in chronological order. Every appointment she had attended, every new medication she claimed to take, every social media post, all of it meticulously mapped. I even color-coded inconsistencies, highlighting where her stories clashed with reality. By the time I was done, it looked like a full investigative report. I told myself repeatedly, patience is key. I couldn't rush this. If I exposed her too early or without full certainty, she could spin the story and regain control. The family had to see everything at once, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. So there was no question, only undeniable truth. I started testing the waters with subtle conversations. A cousin would casually mention a recent family event, and I'd watch Aunt Linda squirm, trying to reconcile her supposed illness with reality. One afternoon, my mother asked how she was managing a particularly long day, and Aunt Linda gave a vague, rambling answer that made no sense. Her words felt rehearsed, defensive, and brittle. Those little cracks reassured me. She was nervous, and that meant she knew the walls of her story were weakening. I couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. And the more careful I was, the more dramatic the reveal would be. The next challenge was timing. I couldn't choose just any moment. Family gatherings, holidays, or casual dinners were too informal, too easy for her to sidestep the truth with charm or tears. I needed a meeting where everyone's attention was on her health, because that was exactly the bait she would bite. I sent out a message to the family, framing it as an update on Aunt Linda's condition. Let's all meet tomorrow evening. Aunt Linda has asked to share some updates about her health, and I think it's important we all hear them together. Everyone agreed, parents, siblings, cousins, and I could tell Aunt Linda was thrilled. She didn't suspect a thing. That night, I went over everything in my mind, rehearsing the order of presentation, anticipating every excuse or denial she could throw at me. Every what-if scenario played out. She could cry, she could scream, she could lash out, she could try to distract everyone. I had contingencies for all of it. By the time I went to bed, I felt a strange mix of nerves and exhilaration. The truth was ready to be revealed, the evidence assembled, the stage set. All that was left was the moment itself, the instant when Aunt Linda's carefully constructed web of lies would finally unravel in front of everyone who had been manipulated by it. I didn't know exactly how she would react, but I did know one thing for certain. She had underestimated me, and underestimating me would be her greatest mistake. Little did I know, the next day would change everything, and that the revelation would be far more explosive than even I had anticipated. The next evening, I arrived at the family gathering early, just as I had planned. Everyone was there, my parents, my siblings, cousins, and even a few neighbors who had a habit of showing up at family events. Aunt Linda floated into the room, radiant as ever, smiling and waving, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. She immediately launched into a dramatic recounting of her latest treatment. "It's been exhausting," she said, voice trembling ever so slightly. "But I'm pushing through. I just want my family to know how much I appreciate their love and support." Everyone nodded, cooed, murmured sympathy, and I could see the concern in my parents' eyes. My stomach tightened. They didn't know, but they were about to see the truth. I waited patiently until she paused and then cleared my throat. "Actually, Aunt Linda, I thought it might be helpful to go over everything together, just so we're all on the same page." She blinked at me, a flicker of confusion crossing her face, but she smiled anyway. "Of course, dear, anything to keep everyone informed," she said, still unaware of the trap she had walked into. I connected my laptop to the TV and opened the folder I had meticulously prepared. "Let's start with the timeline," I said. Here are all the appointments you mentioned over the past year. Click. A series of calendar entries appeared on the screen, and here are the hospital records associated with those dates. Click. Blank. None of them exist. Gasp rippled through the room. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Cousins whispered frantically to each other. Aunt Linda's smile faltered, then vanished. I clicked again, showing photos of her treatments and hospital visits. Every photo you've posted over the past year has been staged. Some are stock images, others taken at home with props to make them look real. Click. I held up my phone, showing the reverse image search results. She froze completely. Her voice, which had been so confident just moments ago, now trembled. You can't do this," she whispered, panic creeping into her tone. I stayed calm. I simply showed the truth and let it speak for itself. By the time I finished, Aunt Linda was pale, defeated, her aura of power completely gone. The family sat in stunned silence, absorbing the reality of her deception. The weight of her lies hung heavy in the room, but the truth was out, undeniable and irreversible. And even in that moment of tension and shock, I felt a strange calm. I hadn't sought to humiliate her. I hadn't sought revenge. I had simply uncovered the truth, and it had already begun to dismantle the world she had built around her lies. But I knew the fallout wasn't over. Aunt Linda's manipulations extended beyond just family. And what happened next would take the consequences to a level she never imagined. The room was silent for a long, heavy moment after I finished presenting the evidence. Aunt Linda's face had gone from shock to disbelief, then slowly to fury. She looked around, desperate, trying to find an ally in someone's eyes. But everyone, my parents, siblings, cousins, were staring at her with a mixture of betrayal and disbelief. "You can't do this," she finally shouted, her voice cracking. I didn't lie. You're lying about me." I stayed calm, letting her words hang in the air. "I'm not lying. I've documented everything. Every post, every appointment, every message. It's all here." She tried to argue, to cry, to plead, but the proof was overwhelming. The stock photos, the staged medications, the emails asking for money. There was no way to deny it. Her usual tactics of guilt and manipulation had no power against facts. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Aunt Linda, why? Why would you do this to us?" Aunt Linda's defenses collapsed, and for a moment she looked almost small, vulnerable. But then anger flared again. "You think you're so clever. This is my story. I've done nothing wrong." I shook my head. "No, Aunt Linda, you've done wrong. To everyone here. You've manipulated us emotionally and financially. You've lied to friends, neighbors, even your workplace. It ends now." Cousins whispered among themselves, some still processing, some looking at me with quiet admiration. My siblings gave subtle nods. They understood the weight of what I had done. Over the next hour, the fallout unfolded in real time. Some family members confronted her directly, asking questions she couldn't answer. Others quietly withdrew, deciding not to continue engaging with her lies. Phones buzzed with messages from neighbors and friends, all of whom had been drawn into her narrative at one point or another. Even Aunt Linda's composure crumbled. Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't the sincere kind. They were the last act of a performance she could no longer control. She tried to explain herself, but her words sounded hollow against the mountain of evidence I had presented. And then came the final, quiet satisfaction. I had prepared one last step. A copy of the full evidence package, including proof of her misuse of workplace sick leave and disability claims, was sent anonymously to her HR department. I didn't need to be the villain in that part of the story. Her own lies would ensure the consequences. By the end of the evening, Aunt Linda wasn't just exposed, she was powerless. Social media went silent. Messages asking for help stopped. The family stopped sending money, stopped enabling her manipulations, and began repairing the trust that had been damaged. I watched all of it unfold, a strange mixture of relief, pride, and lingering unease settling over me. I hadn't wanted to hurt her personally, but seeing the truth take its course, seeing justice quietly do its work, felt right. Even so, I knew this was only the beginning of her downfall. Once HR investigated, and once the truth reached people outside our family, the consequences would multiply, and Aunt Linda would have nowhere to hide from the collapse she had created herself. For the first time in months, I felt a lightness. A sense of order had been restored, that the family's trust could slowly heal, and that I had done what needed to be done. But I also knew one thing. Some people will go to great lengths to deceive, and the truth doesn't always arrive gently. In Aunt Linda's case, it had arrived like a storm, and it would leave no part of her world untouched. In the days that followed, the fallout from the revelation was swift and unrelenting. Aunt Linda's carefully curated world was crumbling, and I watched from a quiet distance as the consequences unfolded. Family dynamics began to shift almost immediately. Conversations that once skirted around her illness now became candid and honest. My parents, still shaken, slowly started processing the fact that they had been manipulated. My siblings were cautiously proud, but also uneasy. Even though they had suspected her, seeing the proof laid bare had been shocking. Neighbors and friends, once frequent correspondents on her social media, reached out to the family, some expressing shock, others their own doubts about the truth. Messages asking for money, support, or visits stopped arriving. Her audience had disappeared overnight, leaving her isolated. And then came the workplace consequences. Within weeks of receiving the anonymous evidence, HR conducted a quiet investigation. Sick leave claims that she had used for months, sometimes years, were examined, and the results were damning. She had been falsifying records, claiming treatments she never underwent. Her job, which she had taken for granted as a safe haven, was gone. She tried to spin it, tried to plead, but the evidence was irrefutable. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth had done the work for me. Aunt Linda's lies, once a source of control and power, had become her undoing. And through it all, I observed quietly, taking mental notes of the strange satisfaction that comes from watching justice quietly do its work. Family gatherings slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. The tension that had hung over holidays and birthdays lifted, replaced with cautious optimism. Conversations were more honest, more grounded, and the trust that had been fractured began to mend. My parents even hugged me one evening, silent but understanding, acknowledging the work I had done without a word. Yet even as the dust settled, there was a lingering unease. Aunt Linda had been so clever, so manipulative, that the idea of her plotting something somewhere still haunted me. I knew that some people are driven by attention and control, and her absence from our lives didn't erase the lessons we had learned about vigilance, honesty, and trust. I realized that, in exposing her, I hadn't just saved my family from immediate manipulation. I had also restored a sense of integrity, a recognition that truth matters, and that even the most carefully constructed lies will eventually unravel when someone is willing to see through them. And while Aunt Linda's downfall was complete in practical terms, the emotional scars remained. For her, yes, but also for all of us who had been caught in her web. But for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace, knowing that the family I loved could begin healing, and that the deception that had threatened us all had been dismantled with precision, patience, and truth. Little did I know, though, that the final lesson of this ordeal was yet to come, a quiet reflection that would remind me how fragile trust can be and how carefully it must be guarded. Months passed after the storm of revelations, and life slowly returned to a new kind of normal. Aunt Linda was no longer a fixture in our family gatherings, her presence replaced by the quiet relief of honesty and stability. Social media, once filled with dramatic updates and pleas for attention, had gone silent. The web of manipulation she had spun was gone, leaving only the stark reality of her actions. I often found myself reflecting on what had happened, not out of bitterness, but to understand the lessons hidden in the chaos. Family isn't always the safe harbor we imagine it to be. Trust, even among loved ones, must be earned and carefully maintained. Lies can spread like wildfire, and the consequences ripple far beyond the initial deception. For me personally, the experience changed how I viewed control, patience, and justice. I realized that confronting manipulation head-on doesn't always require anger or confrontation. Sometimes it's about preparation, observation, and letting truth do the work. I had watched Aunt Linda's carefully constructed world collapse without raising my voice, without dramatics, and it was a lesson in the power of evidence and calm resolve. The family healed gradually. Conversations became more honest, more grounded. Holidays and birthdays no longer carried the shadow of doubt and fear. My parents' eyes, once clouded with worry, regained a sense of clarity. My siblings and cousins started trusting again, not blindly, but with the reassurance that honesty could triumph over years of deception. As for Aunt Linda, her absence was a constant reminder of the fragility of influence built on lies. I never sought to punish her beyond exposing the truth, but watching her life change irreversibly was a quiet form of justice. She had lost credibility, control, and trust, and there was nothing she could do to rebuild the carefully orchestrated image she had created. Sometimes I still think about the subtle ways she tried to manipulate people, the rehearsed photos, the dramatic captions, the tearful phone calls. And I remind myself of the resolve it took to see it through, to collect evidence, and to present the truth in a way that could not be denied. That resolve didn't just protect my family, it gave me a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt before. The final lesson, though, was the most profound. Some lies are never smart enough to survive the truth. And some families, no matter how shaken, are strong enough to endure betrayal and emerge stronger on the other side. I still think about Aunt Linda sometimes, about how she must feel now, powerless, exposed, and stripped of the control she once wielded. But I don't feel triumph over her. I feel clarity. I feel peace. Because in the end, uncovering the truth didn't just expose a lie. It restored trust, protected love, and reminded everyone in our family that even the most intricate deception can't withstand honesty, patience, and courage.